Hello, hello, hello. We are live. Welcome to Inclusion Reimagined, an opportunity to speak to experts, industry experts around the current landscape of inclusion. What does it mean to really reimagine inclusion, but also thinking about the practical tips and strategies and systems we need to put in place to really drive inclusion across our organizations. Today, I'm so excited. I have to say, I'm very excited to be joined by a good friend of mine and a member of the Inclusive Foundations faculty, Sally Spicer, who has a 20-year career leading inclusion, culture, and HR and talent. So, before we get started, I wanted to share a little bit about the Inclusive Foundations program. It's an organization that I built to focus on driving inclusion and culture to build cultures where people thrive and not just survive. An opportunity to work with scale up organizations to help them embed inclusion into their systems. Often we talk about inclusion as these initiatives or campaigns, but actually, if we embed inclusion into our HR processes, if we upskill and support our leaders, then actually we build inclusion into the infrastructure. And that is exactly what we are going to talk about today. So without any further ado, Sally, I'm so happy that you're joining me. Welcome.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much. Been watching and, playing a very small part in what you're launching is just an absolute honor for me. We're all meeting tomorrow, which is going to be super exciting. But yeah, really excited about, kicking this conversation off and having it, because I think we're at this inflection point, right?
We are, right. And, they say DEI is dead, or, everyone is backtracking on DEI. And sometimes when you hear this, and, I'm also going to plug my book, right? So I'm writing this book, The Illusion of Inclusion. And a lot of it is around this illusion that DEI is dead. People are backtracking, no one's prioritizing DEI no more. And although language will evolve, has evolved, right? No one really wants to say DEI no more. We both know that the work still remains, right? Absolutely still remains. Organizations are still doing this work, but it might look and sound very differently. So I suppose, at IFP, we talk about inclusion being part of the infrastructure. And I know that's something that really resonates with you as well. So, let's just get stuck in. So from your perspective, what does it mean to have inclusion as part of an organizational infrastructure?
Well, you know that my background in this work all comes from a very kind of systems thinking approach. So where are the kind of independencies? Where do systems break and what the impacts of those are? But when I look at inclusion as infrastructure, what I mean is how it is designed into how decisions are made throughout the organization, whether they be strategic decisions, whether they be operational, whether they be financial, how are these decisions made? And that for me is where the embedding is. So, what infrastructure is what shapes pressure, shapes behaviors, okay, when we're under pressure. And I think it's fair to say at the moment, from a geopolitical, from a, from an economic perspective, businesses are under pressure. And so we're seeing how that pressure then shapes behavior and what remains as a priority when priorities shift, okay, and what operates whether people are thinking about inclusion or not.
Yeah.
What we typically see is it, showing up in hiring criteria, promotion decisions, performance definitions, leadership expectations. Who holds that power and voice? And I know that the work that you've created, the program you've created, really looks at that whole employee life cycle. So if we think about that in itself as a point of infrastructure to reference, it ties really nicely in terms of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it also, if you think about business, right? And if you think about how, if you're a CEO, if you're a founder and you're building a business, you are building the infrastructure of the organization. You are putting in the strategies and the processes and the policies that allow you to function and be successful as a business. Now, historically, inclusion whatever that, whatever you want to call it, would have been a afterthought. It's kind of like, oh yeah, now we've built the organization, we've hired our first set of staff, and now we're thinking, oh, we don't quite look or represent our clients or our communities. For me, the infrastructure is about how do you actually ensure that as you build your infrastructure for your business, that inclusion is woven into that. Because if you think about, a lot of organizations have always thought about inclusion from a colleague perspective, right? People, it's about who you've got, what's the representation, how do they feel? But we both know that inclusion is so much more than just people. People is a big part to play in it, but also your clients. Are your clients representative of the communities in which you serve? Are they, I always used to say that where money came from 20 years ago is not where money comes from today, and won't be where money comes from in 20 years. And so if you don't build an infrastructure where your client proposition, your client products, your client services are aligned to a wide range of demographics, then you will automatically miss out on opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, and a lot of the work that we're doing in this space is around, if you remove the DEI strategy tomorrow, okay, would anything materially change? Inclusion, because if inclusion disappears when things get busy, it was never infrastructure in the first place. And as business owners, and we've worked with countless over the years, they obsess around systems, processes, efficiency, the metrics, performance.
Absolutely.
And actually recognizing this as a commercial lever is the most important play right now.
I completely agree. Even for some years though, it was very difficult for me to connect or even agree that you could connect inclusion with commerciality. There was this kind of, feeling of, oh, that's ethically wrong to put inclusion with commerciality. And so therefore we made a huge mistake by absolutely like detaching the two. Because if you want to be commercially successful, you need to ensure that you are servicing the widest range of clients that you can. And if you want to do that, you need to be able to connect with them clients. If you have no representation in your business, there's no diverse voices, there's no diversity of thought, then your bottom line will be impacted. Similar to if you don't think that there is a need to hire the best talent. Everyone wants the best talent. Everyone wants somebody who is high performing, who who's hardworking, all of them things. Everybody wants that. But now there is this real competitive edge that actually, a lot of people, I would say Gen Zs and millennials now, as we're kind of the dominant generation in the workplace, are making decisions about where they work and how they work based on organizational infrastructure and ethics and inclusion. So yeah, I think that one's a big one around actually how do we help organizations really embed this into their infrastructure. So I'd love to hear more about, you've worked in talent, you've worked in HR, you've worked in inclusion for several years. And I'm very, very privileged that you are on the faculty. And I'm excited to work with you, Sally, because I have heard you speak, I've seen your work, we've worked together, and I know how awesome you really are. But what patterns do you see, or where do you think inclusion kind of drops off? Where do you see the gaps or the pressure points, would I say, when things, to your point earlier about when things get heated, like what's first to go? What, in your opinion?
I think, and a lot of the conversations that I've been having recently, and I've just come off the back of a roundtable that I hosted down on the South Coast this morning with 15 business leaders, and we were talking about how we raise the standard when it comes to inclusion and how we create that critical business link to commercials, okay? And because it's interesting, when I came into the world of inclusion, I came at it through a commercial lens. I'd worked in sales all my life, and actually the inclusion world turned their back on me and said, actually, that's not what we stand for. And it's now, interestingly, over the last 12 months, we're seeing a real shift change in terms of actually we need to be able to link this to kind of business strategy. But what the patterns I'm seeing is a couple of things. Inclusion becomes abandoned, okay, when the pressure hits. And that could be from a oh my goodness, this feels like too big a cross to bear. All right.
Mm.
Actually, what we're seeing now, and this is one of the prime examples of the conversations this morning, I have really worked on my diversity. Let's call it representation, because we know what we're talking about. I've really worked on my representation, but now they're all just fighting with each other. I can't put them on side with each other because I have created this multicultural workforce that now actually can't get on.
No way.
Yeah, I mean, but this is, I think, real life things. I was working with a lot of engineering focused clients this morning, and they were talking about, actually, this is embedded in terms of the representation or lack of representation we've got. This is embedded. And what have we got control over versus what haven't we got? So I think it's interesting to think about, and this is kind of my systems thinking hat going on. Again, what we need to think about are what the interdependencies, what we've got control over or not. And what we've seen organizations do is kind of create a from scratch inclusion strategy, DEI strategy, whatever you want to call it, which was either a set of initiatives or a couple of programs, or this is going to look great from a reputational risk perspective. This is going to look great because we want to attract individuals, attract this top talent.
Mm.
But what they now realize is actually we haven't embedded equity into our systems. Okay. We haven't embedded it, to your point, into the infrastructure. And oh my goodness, now this work feels hard, because this isn't about awareness days. This isn't about training. Okay. This is about how do we unpick things whilst bearing in mind that if we unpick this, it's going to have an impact over there.
Yeah.
So how can we have this very front and center, this is what we're trying to do right now, and this is the pain or the challenge or the change that we're going to have to go through. And what I loved this morning from this morning's round table was, we're not seeing this as a challenge, we're seeing it as an opportunity. But if we want to take this leap forward and realize the benefit of this opportunity, it's going to have this domino effect on everything else. And I think that is where businesses start to stall, because they think, actually, I either haven't got the capability internally, which is why they come to individuals like you. I haven't got the capacity, all right, and I don't know how to make this link in terms of the commercials to be able to get the investment. And that's what you've got to start at, right? That's what you've got to start at.
It's such a critical point, because even that link between commerciality and inclusion, and actually, if I will take that back, it's the link between commerciality and diversity. Like, they're not the same words.
No.
And I think, and even equity, they are three separate words that we've banded together. I think personally, my personal opinion is that people have an allergic reaction to diversity. When you start talking about inclusion, people are okay with that. Yeah, of course, we want everybody to feel included. But when you start to talk about the facets of your identity and the compounding impact that it has, people get uncomfortable. And so I really relate to what you're saying, because when people, there is a correlation between commerciality and diversity, one, and then there's a correlation between commerciality and inclusion, and then there is a commerciality between commercial and equity. Three different metrics. Because if you are focusing on commerciality and diversity, what you're trying to say is, will we make more money by having more diverse people in the business?
Yeah.
Question mark. McKinsey will tell you yes. All of these, there's so much research out there that will tell you that if you have women on board, ethnically diverse people on board, you will be more profitable. Now, that is being completely taken to shreds at the moment, because people are like, well, you said that 5 years ago, where's the return, right? Not knowing that actually this is a much longer piece of work that needs to be done. Inclusion for me has a commercial lens, because if you make people feel included, they will stay. You have better retention, less attrition. You have people that want to work for you. So I worked in financial services for 18 years, and my son, who's a Gen Z, just couldn't fathom why on earth I would have wanted to stay in one place for 18 years. But actually, it was because of inclusion. It was because I felt supported, I felt recognized, I felt valued, I felt respected. That's what kept me. And so then the commercial value of that is that they didn't have to hire, well, obviously they didn't have to replace me. I then worked harder, progressed in my career, gave the business more. So that's the commercial value. It's very difficult. You can't always feel it and touch it like if you're selling a product, or if you are you know, all your other kind of commercial metrics, inclusion is a very difficult one to kind of be able to quantify, but it is there. And so, yeah, I think that commercial link is really important. I think we can't skate over the reality that people are allergic to the word diversity. People don't want to talk about the different facets of identity and how they have a negative impact in the workplace on individuals.
I think you're right. And I think a lot of it is very confronting for lots of individuals. I think there is an element of what complicit role have I played in this, and actually taking the responsibility for that. Yeah. And, you know, I don't like to ban the word privilege around, because I think that in itself turns people off to the conversation. But I think there is a real element of being complicit in the systems that, you know, you have potentially gained from, whether that be intentional or not. It's not taking away that you haven't worked hard to get where you get from, but where we've got to. What I find really interesting when we talk about the political impact, geopolitical impact that it's having on this work, and also people's experiences, we need to remain, you know, very human about this, is even within the protected characteristics that make up this kind of diversity, if you like, as a term or as an umbrella term, there's even palatable and less palatable ones that people are interested in talking about. And I think it goes one step further. So we can, you know, clearly talk about race, right? We can clearly talk about LGBT communities and how they're now not in favor, and people find it very difficult to talk about. What I found really interesting in my discussion this morning was, even when we start talking about social mobility, which lots of professional services terms are getting on the bandwagon with, okay, and neurodiversity. And I say bandwagon, sorry, that makes me sound like it's not worthwhile. It is. But there's even then a line. You know, I had someone there who was representing the justice system and was representing an organisation who helps people who have been in prison and served time to get into employment. There's still a line, right? There's still a line in terms of, okay, we're going to wave this social mobility flag, but actually we only want these people. We only want these people who we think are deprived and we think are employable. We don't actually want this percentage of people. And the same comes from a neurodiversity perspective. We see, you know, big government organizations going, we are specifically targeting neurodivergent individuals because we know the impact that's going to have positively on us being able to innovate and develop products. So we want those people, but we don't want the ones who need potentially a little bit of extra support. So it's very interesting and observing. We get to see the whole market, right? It's very interesting to see, and again, the complicit roles that we're playing in making those decisions.
And for me, there's a huge part around leadership there, and how we can, you know, because I sit in the camp of, you do not become an inclusive leader just by default. Just because you're a leader, you don't automatically become an inclusive leader. So there is an ownership, I believe, that organizations need to do to bring their leaders up to a standard where they can call themselves inclusive leaders. Because it isn't about being nice. It isn't about, you know, asking everyone to talk around the table. In inclusive leadership, it's actively being intentional about recognizing who is in the room and what they need to thrive. Really, to me, that's my definition of equity. Understanding that everyone needs something different, and then the action. That's what leaders take, is the action to make sure that everybody feels included. Your point is so valid, because even the point around bring your whole self to work, you don't want me to bring my whole self to work, because there's parts of me that are reserved for my family and my friends, you know. But if I did bring my whole self to work, that might require extra support. If I was autistic, or if I, you know, there's so many different things that require extra support, maybe from a technological perspective, or from an access perspective, or and it's when that friction happens, where you now need something different from the norm, that we see organizations say, I'm not sure we have the budget for this. I'm not sure we can support this at this time. So look, there's one thing that I think we've talked about before, which is kind of, where do you think, and I actually didn't get your answer to this, so I'll be interested to hear from you. Where do you think inclusion should actually sit in the business. So we've talked about leadership, we talked about it being in the infrastructure, we talked a little bit about this friction with kind of commerciality and actually the business case. Who owns it? Who should own it? I have a view, as you always know. So what is yours?
My view is, and this is a difficult one to unpick, and I'm not sitting on the fence here, I don't think it belongs on HR. Okay, is my number one question. And I'm saying that from the experience of working in HR in a global head of D&I role. Okay, it did not work.
Yeah.
It needs to be at a level where you have got direct access to, and ideally reporting directly to, the CEO.
Yeah.
If you think about this again from a systems perspective and think about where DEI inclusion, whatever term, and I'm really actually interested to know what term we're going to land on in over the next 18 months. I'm really intrigued because I don't think the term in itself fits at the moment. Yeah. But if you think about it again from a systems perspective, it needs to be embedded into everything in order for it to work in its entirety. It needs to be owned by everyone from an accountability perspective. It needs to get woven in to understand how we measure and how we govern it. And so if you're then trying to silo it into a department, okay, and I think where some of the risk lies within HR is this narrative that it's an HR problem. It's a people problem. It gets part into, well, that's under your remit. And I think also within HR, I think it can play a really good part in terms of, we talk about that in employee life cycle. But really, it's a change team. It's a change team that needs to sit across the whole business. And if you haven't got sight of what the business challenges are, so the conversations that I was cut out of in my role were, what is keeping my CEO up at night? What are the business challenges that are keeping him up at night? And how can I link the work I do to directly impact that? Whether that be from a customer perspective, whether that be from a colleague perspective, whether that be from a market share perspective, whether that be something happening geopolitically. And so that's why you've got to have that, number one, relationship and trust, but you've got to have that influence.
Yeah. And you need to
do my 2 pennies worth.
No, I completely agree. I think that HR play a significant role when it comes to diversity, right? And I really want to keep specifying the difference. I think HR play a significant role when it comes to diversity because, they are the engine that helps the organization bring people into the business, right? But they are not directly the hiring managers. They are not directly the decision makers. And it's been so amazing actually to see the evolution of heads of HR, CPOs now getting a seat at the table when they never used to get a seat. They never used to be in the exec team or around the executive table. So that evolution has been great to see. But what I think is missing is, this is why we set up IFP, because a lot of our work is upskilling and supporting HR teams to become more inclusive, because your CPO is not a culture and inclusion expert. I'm just going to say they're not. And so they might have some alarm bells ringing when they're around that table, but they're not going to be able to really see the nuance of decisions or discussions that are happening. You have a massive conversation about a global restructure. You need somebody from an inclusion perspective sitting around that table really early on to say, okay, what's the impact of this geographically? What's the impact on the composition of our workplace? What does it look like from a diversity perspective if we're going to do this massive restructure? Are there pockets that are going to be impacted more? Now, your CPO would absolutely ask some of them questions, but not to the same degree that if you actually had the inclusion around the table, right? And that inclusion could be cultural transformation, inclusion, whatever you want to call it. I completely agree with you that HR plays such a significant role. And I've worked, with some great HR colleagues who really want to get this right, but they bring the experts in because they understand that they're not the experts. And so the danger of leaving DEI within HR, it becomes just a small fraction of HR. It gets brought into conversations that they think HR, D&I should be involved in, as opposed to sitting, to your point, at that executive level where they're contributing to the business strategy with an inclusion and culture lens. And so I've spoken to some CEOs recently who have said, we want inclusion to be sat at the table that's having business conversations. So that you, not as a D&I person, but as a business leader of this business, so that we can, so that you can help us identify, where the gaps are. I don't know what you
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to add to that a couple of things that in order for this person, so what I haven't spoken about is the recruitment element of my role and the business I run. So I help businesses hire inclusion heads, D&I heads, senior exec level. And where we're seeing where that market is maturing at the moment is absolutely, they need to have influence, but they need to be backed by that head of. And what I've seen a really interesting trend is, imagine like a chief of staff role. Okay, imagine chief of staff roles for a CEO. They are there to disrupt, they are there to challenge, and they are there to execute. It's very, very similar skill set. And where we've, just to roll this back all the way to the beginning of the conversation, where we see a little bit of rollback, a little bit of pushback, is that actually businesses, when the pressure is on, right, they don't want the challenge. They revert to type. They revert to, well, we're just going to do what we've always done, and this is how we can run the business, because they're panicking. They're in this panic, fight or flight mode. Whereas actually, you need the disruption, whether that be of an inclusion head or a cognitively diverse workforce who's going to take you through that innovation and ensure that your business thrives through these really VUCA trading environment that we're all facing at the moment.
Yeah.
And again, you can just see the interconnection or interdependency between all of these plates spinning in the right direction.
Yeah. Amazing, powerful. So look, so at IFP, we focus on high growth, scale up organizations. And the reason why that was important to me is because I have worked in large global organizations, and often they can afford someone like me, they can afford someone like you. They bring us in, we drive the strategy, we work with the teams, we build our own team. And so my thought process, and it was through, I held a few roundtables and some private conversations with some CEOs, and there was a general consensus that we can't afford to do what some of the big players are doing. We can't afford to have a head of DEI. We can't afford to have a head of culture or talent acquisition. We've got a small functioning HR team, and actually they are responsible for, along with the founder, responsible for culture. And so that really led me to think about, well, actually, what happens when you are an organization that you've got maybe 200 staff, 250 staff, you're growing rapidly, and you have to do a gender pay gap, right? And essentially you might need to also do an ethnicity pay gap and a disability pay gap at some point, but you don't have the expertise. And so that's what we do. We come in to support high growth businesses. I suppose the question to you, Sally, is why is that? Why do you think that's important there? Then not the big organizations, but the kind of the FTSE 250s and below. Why do you think inclusion is important to them?
Because they're going to have the biggest impact, right? If you think about them like as a category of organizations, they're the ones that are going to have the biggest impact. Those are the ones that are going to be the disruptors in the market. Those are the ones who are going to need to not only attract this kind of top talent, high performance, high potential staff in order to be able to innovate and kind of gain market share from the biggest players. We saw it in the insurance market, okay? We saw these big general insurers, which is where I used to recruit for years and years and years. But then you start seeing these kind of offshoots, which is focusing on one product, right? And they were going out there and they were disrupting, they were taking market share. Wow. So I think is where we are situated as a society, like from an economics perspective, we have got such an opportunity within these organizations, and these organizations have got a lot of stake, and especially if they're going through seed funding, etc. They've got to get the infrastructure right. And if you go back to the point that you made earlier, if you think about two of your major stakeholder groups, one of them being your customers and one of them being your staff, okay, future or existing, those are the ones who are going to be voting with their feet. So we have to prioritize this as a commercial, we have to use inclusion as a commercial lever, and the conversations I was having this morning were, because it's very similar sized businesses, what these businesses don't have is either the capability, right, or the capacity. They've not got one of those things.
Yeah.
And so it's really important that if you are going to outsource or gain expertise, you're doing it with an organization who knows what they're doing. Because what I think and what I observed about this market over the last however many years is everyone can talk a good talk in inclusion world. Everyone knows it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And they know the systems that they need to disrupt, if they can even think about it at a systems level. And they know what, another point I wanted to make, and I appreciate we're really over time, we're going to be over time, but another point I think is really super important to make is everyone thinks they know what D&I is. Everyone thinks they know what inclusion is. Everyone thinks they know what, inclusive hiring is. Everyone thinks they know what inclusive leadership is. Everyone thinks they're doing it, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is they're not. So it's really important, I think, to partner with someone who's been there and seen it, who knows what failure looks like, who knows what good looks like, and essentially who isn't just talking a good talk, but knows how to embed this and get people on board and meet them where they are, which I know that you will absolutely excel at.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why also, this idea of, so we have 3 pathways. We have the foundation pathway, the committed pathway, and the exemplar pathway. 3-month program, 6-month program, 9-month program. And that is not saying that you will fix your DEI or your inclusion challenges in 3 months. But what it does do is it helps inject inclusion into your systems quite specifically. So really thinking about, what are your leaders doing today? What do they need to be doing differently? What are your policies saying today? How can they look differently? What are your strategies doing? How can they look differently? Really go into the root cause and doing it in a way that what I describe as kind of building the capability in-house. We want to train your people. We want to support your people so that when we step away, it's still there. People feel confident to do that work. Look, Sally, thank you. Always thank you. I actually love you so much. Like, I feel like we've had such great conversations, and this has been awesome. Thank you for giving me your time. I'm excited to have you on the faculty. I think we're going to do some amazing work together. And to everyone who has been listening or listening in the replay, thank you so much for joining us today on Inclusion Re-Engineered.
Thank you.
No worries.